Good morning and welcome, everyone. So great to have you here. And before I start introducing our three amazing artist guests, I wanted to read a paragraph from um, Adrienne Marie Brown's book, Emergent Strategies. I don't know if you guys have read this. It's really an incredible piece of writing. Wherever you are beginning this, take a deep breath and notice how you feel in your body and how the world around you feels. Take a breath for the day you have had so far, and a breath for this precious moment which cannot be recreated. Now, another for the day and night coming. Here you are in the cycle between the past and the future, choosing to spend your miraculous time in the exploration of how humans, especially those seeking to grow liberation and justice, can learn from the world around us how to best collaborate, how to shape change. And I thought that's a really appropriate passage to introduce the three of you: Barry Johnson, yay, Carol Williams, yay, and Malaz El-Jignabi. I hope I said that right. I've been practicing, Malaz. Because the three of you, I have the honor, and I'm so grateful to have you as friends and to know you. The three of you are doing amazing work in the world, which is, for me, very much an expression of this change that we are working towards and collaborating on creating, co-creating. So I'll just tell you briefly how I met these amazing artists. So I met Carol first. So I'll start with you, Carol. And Carol and I met by chance at an opening in Seattle. And it was just like an instant attraction for me. You know, it's like a moth to the flame. Because Carol is someone who carries so much light in everything she does and so much wisdom, divine feminine wisdom. And I call you a goddess. And she's a courageous goddess who stepped forward into her own power as an artist and as a soul to really shape change here. So I am so grateful for you, Carol, and for all that you've brought into my life and helped me to grow and become a better person with all that you've shared from your heart with me. So thank you so much, love. Barry, I met next. And I don't know how Barry found me. That's really weird, but he did. And he invited me to participate in an amazing collaborative art effort with a group called Forward Flux Productions. And I think we were like 20 people, very beautiful mixed race, mixed gender, mixed art forms. And Barry was the director, curator of that and our guide. And the title of that project was I Am Who I Am. And that was a very profound experience for me. And Barry, you were just the most gentle, loving, avant-garde voice for me. And you have also shaped my life and helped me to grow. And also just to witness your own growth for me as a artist has been wonderful, and your humility and your courage too, you know, to just step out and really become who you are on this path and guide us. So thank you so much for all you share with us in the world. And Malaz, I met in Cleveland, Ohio. Would you believe it? At a place called the Stone Oven, where I just love the Stone Oven. I'm sure, Malaz, you like that too. It's this really cool coffee hangout. And her little boy walked in and just filled the room. And I just couldn't take my eyes off this child. He was just he's such a deep, wise old soul. And then his beautiful mother came in, and we just couldn't resist talking with them and became friends. And then Malaz and I both are architects. So I have an architectural background, and Malaz is an architect. And she's also an amazing artist and activist. And so I felt that bringing your three voices together would be an incredible orchestra for us to hear this morning, to talk about the work you're doing in the world around racism, social justice, Black Lives Matter, and also your own artworks generally. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jackie, if I may, and we'll get the ball rolling. And thank you so much for being here. I'm so grateful to all of you. Love you.
Well, thank you again. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for this really important conversation. Again, these conversations that we have on the Block Party are not always easy to have. They're delicate conversations, and we've cultivated a sacred space, in my opinion, that we can all come together as one unified voice to address this social unrest, what's going on, and really truthfully and unapologetically discuss among people of color what is going on, and to share our expression and my artistic expression as I'm a writer. So I'm really encouraged by this gathering right now, and I would love to invite the artists to express in your own words, through your art, what do you see as going on? How can you express what is going on right now, and about the global movement of Black Lives Matter and how that informs your work? Anyone, please start.
Can you say the first question again? Do you want us to answer all three of those, or should we go one by one? Or I guess I'm just
Really organically, I guess what I'm asking is, and Barry and I have had the opportunity to speak several times about what we see as people of color, what is going on. I'm Puerto Rican heritage. I'm from New York City. I grew up in the projects, and there's a different experience for me as to respond to what is going on right now. How do we explain what is going on right now? And as artists, how do you express your interpretation of what is happening currently right now, especially with the Black Lives Matter and the global movement of what Black Lives Matter is?
I guess I can start since I asked that question. I right now I feel like so a little bit of my background is I worked in the employment fields for almost 20 years at every level. I was a manager, an employment program coach, job coach, all that, career coach, whatever. And I transitioned my skills from actually being able to help people find jobs and find their passion to the art world. I started my art business in 2006, but I actually fully transitioned in 2012. So I haven't worked for 40 hours a week in a hell of a long time. And I am deeply passionate about the environmental movement and how that's also shifting. And I've in the past 4 or 5 years, I've watched the environmental movement and the art movement transition into this philosophy of equity and what that looks like for artists of color. I've been in the art scene in Seattle probably for more than, how old's my son? So 20 years at least, and I never got an award until 2 years ago. And so there was definitely something wrong with that system. So where I'm coming from and how I feel about what's going on today is I feel like we are in a global shift in terms of awareness, in terms of systemic oppression and institutionalized oppression. And it's inevitable. Like it's going to happen. It has to happen. And there are times where I feel like Trump was a catalyst for that, you know? And if we cannot get past race in this country, I do not think that we are going to survive as a country. I also think that if we do not get past our consumption and our capitalism, we will not survive as a species. And I deeply believe the reason why these things are happening now in conjunction with COVID is because it has to happen. it's time for it to happen. And it is something that not only the earth and Mother Nature and whatever you want to call your spiritual guide, it's not, it's that for me is calling human beings to take charge of our list that we've accumulated over 400 years in this country. And that's race, that's environment and consumption, it's capitalist ideologies in terms of not being able to co-lead, co-create, co-sustain, co-believe, right? And so I deeply believe we are in a serious transition. We're at a crux right now. And it's an opportunity for human beings, specifically American human beings, because we are basically the ones who are producing everything, consuming everything. We're like the top 1% in the world that's completely polluting the earth. And we're polluting ourselves, you know? So I just feel like we're at a turning point, and it's an actual opportunity, you know? So some days I have hope about that, and some days I'm just drained by that. But I just feel like it's inevitable, you know? It's the path that needs to be taken, and I hope that as a collective, we're able to really see that this is an opportunity to not go back to what we term as normal, right? Because that normal was not normal in the first place. So that's where I'm at around it. I think it's all connected. I don't think that Black Lives Matter is separate from, you know, police brutality or any of the other isms that we're dealing with. I think it's all connected, and there's a reason why we're in this position right now. Yeah.
That's a really interesting note, Carol, about how it's all connected. I think for me, thank you so much for saying that. I agree with you with 100% certainty about Trump kind of being the catalyst for this, which is a really interesting notion, right? It's like the whole idea of let's just present America as many of us have always known it to be, and then let's put that on the biggest platform possible for a speaker, which is the president, and then let's just let everybody respond to it. The change is so necessary, and as you pointed, we absolutely are not going to weather the future if we don't address it. Though I do believe, as it pertains to the Black Lives Matter global movement, that it is one of the things lumped into a lot of things that need to happen. It is one of the things that in my work has just been the forefront of it all, because it's all as Black people and brown people we've ever known. So it's kind of really interesting looking at, you know, as you brought up, like how you're starting to get, you know, awards, which are well overdue because your work is amazing. And the response that, you know, people are giving to Black and brown voices right now, I do believe that it's imperative that for everything that's happening right now, rather than just like lumping it all in like it's gumbo and saying like we're gonna, you know, mix it all and deal with it at once, it's very important that we address issue by issue. Because if we don't address issue by issue, we can kind of get a blanket sorry for everything. And personally, I don't think that's a good enough sorry, because so much continual shit has just happened that it makes me feel like, okay, if we really genuinely are going to create change, then we need to address the elephant in the room, and that's that systemic oppression, racism, gender inequalities, inequalities based on sexual orientation has just persisted since time, and that we need to deal with them piece by piece. So I'm all for everything that you've said here, and thank you so much for bringing that up. But, you know, I think it's important that we look at things like on an individual level and just deal with those, because the change is going to be long. And if we just try to deal with it all at once, I don't think the most effective change will happen. I think it will just be like a collective, we're sorry, and then let's continue to move forward. And that's not a genuine sorry. It's like you really need to address things bit by bit.
Okay, so I hear the word, thank you for both Carol and Barry for sharing your view on what's happening. I've heard the word global from both of you. And when you say that, for someone like me who is an African diaspora, so I'm Sudanese in America, the word global probably means something different to when Americans say global Black movement. Because for me, global Black movement includes the recent revolution in my country that overthrew a 30 years dictatorship. And the people coming together who for 30 years has hoped for change, to finally see it happening. But to do that at the expense of a lot of souls that are lost over these years, and to confront a lot of things, similar things that happening in a different place in the world, but carries the same injustice, same weight of injustice, racism. So when I look at what is happening now, and I think of it as a tidal wave that is swooping the earth. And then it has been for a while. It has always been in this kind of continuous movement, and now it has reached America. The same way the sandstorm it's reaching, the Saharan sandstorm is reaching Cleveland. That we have the same thing between us, human, and how we inhabit the world and nature, and how it's working, and we are all working. So now we are at this moment here in America, and we are at sync with nature. We're slowed down. We're forced to listen. We are forced to acknowledge the wave that's coming, that is gonna flip power. And I think this is what we are witnessing now. We're witnessing a change of power. And with that comes, what comes, all the act of resistance that comes with it. From people who want power and from people who are gonna lose power. And so, yeah, I think same way we have seen the same change happening in Sudan, when the power has changed, the power dynamic, and that difficult labor, the process of labor that's gonna come, and how, imagine if you're having a baby and that baby's getting born, and that having hard labor, the family comes together to help. So I'm seeing this, I'm seeing the community coming together to facilitate that birth of this new power structure. Against a lot of what you said, could be against human power and power between human, between power and structures, laws and regulations, and also systems, financial systems, ecological system, I mean, physical and body system as well. So who has power? Is the little virus, or me, the big human, you know? Is it the invisible currency, or the interaction we actually get to see, you know? There's a lot of these shifts that are gonna be happening. So, yeah.
It's interesting. I want to respond a little bit to what you said about like Americans speaking globally. I think we definitely do have our own idea of what global means, you know, and I feel like sometimes as an American, I am cut off from a lot of information from the rest of the world in terms of what is actually happening in the world. But when I think about global, it's interesting because I actually grew up in Germany until I was about 11. And I grew up on a military base that was put there and sanctioned right after this switch of power happened in Europe, or in Germany specifically. And so we were occupying in an occupied place that had already shifted and fallen down and literally had to recreate not their culture, but their ideal of what culture meant, right? And so when I think about global, it's very interesting because I think about the first time that I came to the United States and I had not grown up in a Black community, and we landed, me and my mother, landed in Tacoma, which is a military base, Fort Lewis. And it was an all Black community. There were also Indigenous folks and Latina folks in my high school. But I remember thinking back, like, wow, this is a really strange culture. Like, that was the first thing that I thought when I got here. And it took me decades to figure out how to maneuver in this society. And so when I think of global, I think of this concept of not really understanding outside of your bubble, right? And I think when you're talking about this shift around what these binaries, right? I just feel like that's part of it, right? This whole awareness that we are not the only people here. This whole awareness that we are not the only culture in America, and that in order to survive as a country, I just feel like my idea of global is more about a broader perspective in terms of what we're doing in the world, how it affects other people in the world, what other people are doing in the world, and how that affects us, right? And not being afraid of that. Yeah, I don't know. This makes me think about a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because you think about this whole notion of global, and I saw that Brett just put something in the chat about something was said that like global is global. It's really interesting because dependent on your situation, global, if you are someone that's stuck inside bad circumstances, let's just say that, you grew up in an impoverished neighborhood, country, town, whatever it may be, if you are systemically held down by so much and you cannot visualize what the life could be outside of your community, as Carol brought up, like being able to have the experience in Germany, to hear global, while it may pertain to everyone, as it pertains to issues for the individual, that view could change on a person by person basis, especially as like in this moment that we're talking about the struggle of people collectively, like what our fight is here as Black and brown people, what the fight overseas could be, what are we even fighting for? So this whole notion of global is actually more condensed than, as it simply is just said, like, oh, we all are going through things is a collective universally. It's really pertains to a community level, which is really where all, wherever I start to talk about change, where I believe real change happens. It's like on the lowest levels. It's like you think about a pebble in the water. It's like if I can affect change within my group of artists, my community, my neighborhood, the hope is that permeates out to other communities. The work is always about being able to affect change on the biggest way possible, but to think about it in the context of I can change the world is such a hard statement. I look at it from the perspective of how do I change on my local community level? And I'd be interested, Carol Malaz, to hear like what your work and what your thoughts are on like how you're going about affecting change through your work.
I can answer that. So I actually, I deeply believe that as well, Barry. In my master's program, one of the key pieces that I took away was this concept that, and this is what we were taught, this concept that it doesn't take 100% of the people to change the world. It only takes about 3% of the population to actually shift consciousness and to shift what has been to what could be, right? And if you think about that, that's not a lot of people. If you think in the millions, right? That's like, what, 3,000, 300,000 people, some 3,000, I don't know, my math is bad, but it's 3%. And so when I'm like doing my work and I'm engaged in my practice of art, I'm a painter. My guide has always been that my work is not for a capitalist society, which probably is why it has taken a while for my career to grow, but that's okay with me. I decided early on in my art career that I didn't want to just paint imagery or things that didn't have substance, didn't have content, didn't have a reason to be made. And so a lot of my work deals with climate collapse. It deals with biospecies extinction and Black and brown people and LGBTQ equity models. And so for me to be able to do that work, I have also figured out in my art practice that I cannot do it in solitaire, right? Like it's not a solitary experience in terms of what affects the imagery or the installation or the sculpture or whatever. I have to be in practice with community, right? In order to bring and see the things that I want to produce in my artwork. And most times they both go hand in hand and influence each other. And for me, that's the local level. You know, I'm deeply involved in a lot of, I'm involved as a consultant in ANN, which is the Artist New Deal, where we are building, we've already already started it, a community practice for art organizers. And then I'm also a consultant on CORD, which is community organized redevelopment. And we're working to help people that have been gentrified in Seattle to be able to either come back or stay in Seattle by purchasing their own home. And I'm also the co-executive director of Community Arts Create, where we are in community all the time, doing exhibitions and festivals and all kinds of stuff, you know? So for me, I cannot do my personal practice as a painter without my connection to my community. And that's not true for a lot of artists, you know? A lot of painters really do like to be in a solitary room, you know, painting away, doing their flowers, whatever they do, you know? And I have never been that type of artist. I've always been the type of artist where I need to know like the facts. I need to know the details. I need to know like what's happening in my vicinity, in my community, with the people I care about. And I think that's also what's made me successful as an artist, is that the relationships that I've built in the community. And for me, success is not the traditional model of just making sales, you know, which is how I became an art consultant. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question completely, but I think that's what it is for me.
Absolutely. Yeah, it does 100%. How about you, Melez?
Oh, you're muted. You're muted, Melez.
I had to think for something quickly, so I missed your question. If you could ask again, then I will answer. What was the question, Barry?
Oh, I was just asking, you know, as it pertains to the work that you're creating, how is it affected by the community? Is it driven by community, or where essentially is like the inspiration for your work? Where does that emanate from?
Well, this is very interesting. I think I would say all of them. I float in every space, either if I'm doing an artwork that is very deeply personal, as in response to something that I want to put out there in the world. There's a lot of performances that I do that, just a second. Okay, thank you. I do performances that sometimes that has no audience. That's been something I've done for quite a while, where I don't invite anybody. I don't create a setup for an audience, and they are public performance. And I like to think that the audience is this space and time. So that's very personal performance that I do. But a lot of the other work that I do as well is related, heavily embedded in community and civic practice of art, where I give up my power as an artist to the community. And then I become the tool to then regain some of that power back, to become the tool to either mobilize the community in a way or work with them on a certain issue. A lot of it are heavily complex issues like gentrification, issues like environmental injustice, and those issues are by default, the impact of it is happening on the community. So I work with them as to come up with even just what can we do, and me as an artist, how can I contribute to that issue. There are artwork that when I do, they are distanced, like critical artwork. They have an audience, and that audience is the community. So it's mostly like responding to something like that I want to provoke a critical thing, or I'm responding to something that has done by the community. Sometimes that community is local. Sometimes it's a global community. For example, like there was a performance I did at the Black Lives Matter protest in Cleveland, and I had a big Target sign drawn, and I walked into the protest. And when I had the performance itself was happening to the community of that protest at the time. But then when I shifted that to my online community, the response, because of the diversity of that community, has been very variable. So my friends in Sudan, for example, have seen that performance when I had the police officers in the military tank behind me. They've seen it as a statement on the aggression of American power on foreign lands. They've seen the brutality of American army, that Abu Ghraib, the atrocities that were happening in Iraq and in Iran and in Afghanistan and all of these. So my friends from countries that has been under the oppression of American army, their response to that, even though this was a very local performance, was very targeted to the community of Black Lives Matter, to Desmond Franklin protest, it resonated and it shifted to a completely global community out there. And for many other people, but here, the segregation of communities that are happening in America, for example, the fact that I had a Target sign that looks like a Target at the store, it was intentional. My community of architects response that felt attacked because they create those establishments. They care about them. They were worried when they were burned. They were worried when they were looted. They put out statements from organizations like my local architecture community put out a statement apologizing for business owners and completely ignoring the protests of like the people. So they've seen it. My community of feminists, when they've seen that I'm the target, they've seen the target of all targets, a woman a Muslim, a foreigner from a Black, this is kind of like the combination
Wow.
of all of them. So
Wow. Yeah, absolutely.
so and I think all of them. I think, you know, if that's sort of answers.
That is, you know, it's such a really interesting thing that you just made me think about is the work and the intended audience that it's for, the power of what the internet can do, and how art can just shape perception and change opinion so quickly. It's like when you're there, it's a protest, you get one response, and there you have people that are uniformly standing up against injustice, police brutality. Then you bring it online, and your community of architects are now feeling attacked, and you're carrying, as you brought up, the so many different layers, and can just be attacked or supported on so many layers, just uplifting the community. It's just such a really powerful thing. It speaks to the weight that we carry as artists, not in a negative way, but really the responsibilities and the roles that we signed up to be able to do. So thank you for sharing that, as well as Carol, thank you so much for sharing that. Community is at the center of, it sounds like, through all of our work. It's just, you know, you start doing the work on the level that it's needed with the hope that it goes farther. And it's just great to know that community lies in all of our works.
I just wanted to respond to that a little bit as well. When I was hearing you speak, Melez, one of the things that I thought about was this concept in the history of community art. So this is not like, I don't want to say it's a new term, but especially in Seattle, like social justice art and anything that is conceptual that makes you actually think in terms of community art, has only just started to gain traction in our city in Seattle. And it's probably only been for the past 4 or 5 years that it has been elevated, just like craft art has now been elevated in Seattle. And this concept of community art that is in connection with community is a very interesting concept, because if we go to the tail end of what you said around ownership of these buildings and we don't own them, one of the things that comes up to me around art is this concept that we don't own the art, you know, and community art was the beginning of art in human history, right? Art was always in community with people. It was never in a gallery. It was never in a museum. It was never in an institution. Yet the people who built these institutions and the people who honor and parade these institutions in our faces, like you can't be a member because of this, or you can't join because of this, or all these stipulations, it's like, to me, it's tied to this concept that for them, art is not about community, right? You get paid to do a piece of art, you put it up somewhere in you know, even public art, you put it up on a corner, you know, or you put a mural up. But it's only recently in our city where there has been conversation and dialogue around what is community art. And what I have found is that a lot of the art that comes out that is directed at social justice, directed at all these different issues that or challenges that we're facing, tend to be coming out of communities of color. And why is that? And that goes back to this history of how art started to be commodified, right? And how if I go to the Seattle Art Museum, I know that at least 60 or 70% of the art that is African art in that institution was stolen, yet they're still showing it and they're still like touting it. And the same with like the Asian Art Museum, instead of supporting these institutions, instead of supporting the community institutions like Wing Luke that was started by the community, ramped up by the community. It's located in the community. These concepts of like, not only what is art and where our practice comes from, but how is that received in a world that is not accepting of that type of art, right? And I think that's shifting as well. I've seen the shift, you know, I've seen it start to shift in Seattle. But it's just, what you said made me think about those two things, connection to one another.
And I think that's, you know, the whole idea that social injustices and that like art responding to that is coming to the forefront, to me is just it's a big duh moment. And the fact that these institutions are now like, oh yeah, like let's welcome you in to talk about it, help guide us. We need to, you know, you can create the change and find the right people to work with. Hopefully allyship gets developed there. I'm also concerned about the idea of just getting used, because to the whole point about, you know, public art getting propped up, it's more so, it's kind of tokenism at its finest. It's like, we're gonna handpick a few people that we select and say that your work is worthy of being in this space. And once you've created said work, it's now in our ownership, which I've always stood against as an artist, which is why I like community art the most, because as brought up earlier, that you said, Carol, it's the metamorphosis of art entirely is on a community level. So I love to be able to do pop-up projects that involve the community that I'm in, because if I'm just creating public artworks, I always feel like I never feel the real connection there. I always feel like I've done something, and as a creative, there needs to be a way for me to continue to survive. So there's an exchange of resources, you know, and then once that's done, it's like I've now given that over to a person that their intention and to preserve that work and to continue the message of that work may die the moment I hand it over to them. And that's always been a bit of a problem. We recently, all 16 of us collaborated on this massive mural in Seattle. We're calling it a monument. It's more than it's a mural, and it's got Black Lives Matter. It was great. We had the opportunity to come in, make this work. We didn't know that the work was going to get shown across the world, which is a great thing, because we're just there saying a human statement. You know, Black Lives Matter is not a political statement, it's a human statement. So once we created this work, I don't know if everyone on the call knows that this area inside of Seattle has been occupied for the past few weeks. Just a couple days ago, they came in and they swept the place. They arrested a bunch of people and they just started destroying the art. One thing that they did is they put a bunch of cones around the work that we had created. And for someone that created the work, you know, they may be like, oh, this is a good thing. I'm absolutely against that, because them putting cones around that work and saying that they're going to work to preserve it gives them ownership of the narrative of the work, which just over the course of 2 days, our intention creating the work, what we said about the work is now starting to shift because it's now in another party's hands. And that is why with public art, it's such a fine line. And I'm the part of the collective artists that made it. And I'm like, hey, we need to talk about getting rid of the work, or we need to have a real seat at the table to talk about how we can preserve that work in the way that we saw it. Because if they are able to keep the work, they're going to shift the narrative, and it's not going to be what we originally have made it for. And it's like, you know, the whole issue of how so many concepts get mixed up in one. It's like, we need to address these bit by bit in order to create change. That just made me think of that.
Well, I mean, I'm so glad to know that you were one of the artists that did the Black Lives Matter, because it was an inspiration for me here to try to move things a little bit in Cleveland. But we got delayed. We didn't get the approval to do the mural, so we decided to do a Black Lives Matter human performance mural as an act of resistance to the delay of change in policies. But anyway, But I wanted
Beautiful, beautiful. I love
to,
it.
I wanted to mention something about what you said in terms of ownership of the art and who owns it and how can you really reclaim and who has the power. When they put those cones, they claim power over it, and you have the power. You can go tomorrow and erase the whole thing. It's you. What is the artist's statement in terms of, like, again, is that power, aggression, you know? And this recalls in Sudan in 2019 when they had the sit-in. People went and had a complete, like, protester, peaceful protester, had a sit-in outside the military headquarters. And it was the Sudanese revolution went down in history as the most peaceful revolution in the history of humankind. It was something that's so hard to do, because you will be walking in the marsh and they will kill your friend next to you. They will shoot you in the eye. They would arrest you and torture you and let you go, and then the next day you will go and you will protest peacefully. Now, one of the major factors of how people maintain their nonviolence was art. They filled the space in front of the military headquarters with murals. Everywhere, on the floor, on the walls, everywhere. Every time someone died, someone else picked up a brush instead of picking up a weapon and going fighting against it. And then they did, they used art as an act of resistance to this giant, brutal military machine and power. And the first thing, that's exactly what happened. The military and the paramilitary force came and they committed a massacre. They, like, they dispersed all the sit-in. They broke it. So they pushed everyone out of that. They killed a lot of people in the process. It was way more brutal than what you guys are experiencing. But the first thing they did when they broke the sit-in, they brought paint and they wiped off all the art. They didn't preserve it so it can bring money to them. It can bring attention to them. They claimed the power of saying, we truly control the art. What the people are doing in Seattle is they're saying, we're gonna exploit your art. You make it, we benefit from it, because, you know, that's how it's gonna be.
100%.
And that's going back to when you said feeling used and being used as a person of color to work with community. And that's the question that I always kind of ask myself, why people of not of color, why they can't work with the community? Like, what's the problem with that? I would like to have a conversation and understand their point of view in terms of, like, why there's this category where, like, a lot of people of color are very good at working with the community, but you get other people who are not, and it's okay for them not to be working with the community. And why is that happening? Is it a lack of skill? Is it fear? Is it a lack of value in that type of work and understanding? And if you really want to work with the community, do you support a culture of working with that promote the community art, or do you support people who work with the community? I think that's always been a question for me on that term, because that's when I feel like the line between exploitation or like being used and being embraced as a part of the culture, being given the opportunity to really express who you are, what you do as your work.
Yeah, and Carol, were you about to say something? Go ahead. Sorry.
It's okay. I was just about to say that I think it's twofold. And I'm just thinking about my experience. I think it took me a while, like I said, when I decided that I would only work 20 hours a week, and that would probably be for somebody else or consulting or whatever. at that point, I had actually made a conscious decision that I was going to be an artist, and that was going to be my life mission, to use my art to change or to help, or to whatever word you want to place there. And once I made that conscious decision, it took me maybe a couple years to really feel comfortable in that new label, right? The identity that I selected. And once that happened, I feel like I took my own power, right? Which is why I made the decision to not just art for commodity, right? I feel like I took my power and I said, this is what I'm gonna do. And I don't know how I'm gonna get there, but I'm gonna get there. And persistence and determination and staying true to my own path. That for me came about in a lot of different ways in terms of my strength as a person. And I've been able to like look back, and I think one of the reasons why I feel like that was a really solid and strong choice that I made is because there was a large portion of my life where I didn't deal with racism, and I didn't know that there was racism, you know. And I was like, I mean, and maybe most people are like this up to the age of 11 or 12, but I think that it was good for me not to grow up in this country and not to be in, for my first half of my life, not to be submersed in racism, submersed in identity conflict and all of these other things. And so I feel like that made me stronger as a person. And also the things that I went through when we moved to Tacoma, you know, living in an all Black community, there are a lot of things that also happened that also made me stronger. But I think in terms of power, I think that there are the majority of the public, they don't feel like they have the power to do anything, right? And it's only now that I'm starting to see conversations in bigger circles with people who actually have the power to throw $100,000 at a program, or, you know, shift the way equity looks in the system. These big art organizations in Seattle. It's only recently that I've actually started to see these organizations take interest in the type of art that we do. And valuing that in a way that is not commodified or where you're tokenized, you know. I think that there is a shift happening, and I can see it and I can feel it. My fear is that it's not going to come fast enough, and I battle with that fear all the time, you know. But there is definitely a power shift happening and a dynamic that it feels like people are trying to take their power back, you know. And that to me is really good anyway, all the way around. Yeah. I had a point and I forgot what it is. I was getting to somewhere.
So you just said something so beautiful. So it's really interesting. You talk about how these institutions and organizations are now starting to create space for people that historically haven't been given opportunities to create more work, and that they're giving more and providing more resources. And then towards the end of that, you said that people are starting to reclaim their power. There it is right there. Like, people collectively, our collective consciousness is rising. Our internal gold, platinum, whatever the most precious stone may be that exists, that we have had suppressed and told to, you know, quiet forever, is now starting to illuminate. It's like we all are born, and we all have that inner child in us. It's like we're all born artists, and then once you get to, like you talk about, Carol, when you're about 11, suddenly the art that you make is no longer good. Someone could be like, hey, like, that art that you're making isn't the best art, and then you take it personally, and then that art just goes away entirely. Even though we're all born to be able to do this, you brought up such a beautiful point, because we genuinely are starting to say, you know what? I am something. I can be something. And the way that you've treated me and people like me, we can't do that anymore. And the really interesting thing about the power structure is people believe, you know, I just use the word power in front of them. Once we as a collective change the narrative and say no more, they have to listen. Like, there's nothing that on their end that took place that made them be like, you know what? We should start doing more for these communities. No, it's the community said enough. We're no longer, you brought up a point earlier that was great about how, you know, you work within communities and that like some artists can work in isolation. Like these whole paint by numbers artists that is just cookie cutter art, no disrespect to them at all. But the work that is going to shift the world, like was brought up about, you know, using art is activism during a peaceful protest, even though people are getting killed, and still just creating art about it. There's a point about why the art immediately got wiped away. So long that there are no artifacts that are coming from creatives about what happened, you can always control the narrative. That is why it's so critical right now that we make as much work as possible and say as much as we can, as loud as we can. Because 2020 is a year of transition for us, but to a lot of people, 2020 is a mess. So if we don't create the work, create the dialogue, and create those pathways, history will say 2020 didn't happen. So they'll be like, oh no, it was just kind of a crazy year and a lot of things happened. Because that's happened historically with Black and brown people. It's like our history has been covered up and distorted to make it seem like we were never of any type of relevance to the world, whenever we have such a strong lineage. So it's very important that people continue, like you said, Carol, to understand their intrinsic worth and let that shine through like a star that just exploded, like burned the brightest. Like we want it to be out there as strong as it can be, because if we are the ones that create the change is within us. And that change that you talk about being super slow, I believe it too. It's going to be a slow change, because the world is like, whoa, okay, there's so much happening that I can only deal with it bit by bit. The change needs to happen though. And so long that we continue to be loud, the change will happen. So thank you. I just went off on a tangent, but thank you so much for bringing that up. That's just it's such an impactful statement that you just made.
I just wanted, so, you know, so you guys believe that change happens slow? I don't. I believe in the tipping point. I believe that excuse me.
Do it, Queen, do it.
I believe that there comes a point where there's an iceberg model, and there's these things that are existing above the water level that we can see, that we can understand or try to understand. But below that mark of the iceberg, under the water, there's all these things like racism, abuse, just bad treatment of women, just all the violence piece in our culture underneath that we cannot see and we operate in every day. These things are being risen to the top. The water level is going down. People are starting to see that shit is real, right? That like, this is no joke. And what is happening needs to happen. It's time. The water goes up, the water goes down, water goes up, water goes down, right? And I really feel deeply that change can happen in an instant. And if you pay attention to Mother Nature, if you pay attention to the environment that we exist in, you can see that happening all the time, right? Like when a caterpillar becomes a butterfly, it's a split fucking second. It doesn't happen slowly. It happens, you know, they get fat, what is that? Coconut? No, that's not it.
Chrysalis.
Thank you. You know, and they stay there for a minute compared to the rest of their life, right? Compared to the life that they were as a caterpillar, compared to the life that they will become a butterfly. That moment in that second is very short in comparison to the rest of it. And I feel like if you're looking through an hourglass or a timeline of human history, we are at a point in the world where we have the idea of poverty has lessened. There's less people in poverty than there ever was. There's more people in history that have been educated than ever was. There are tremendous positive, uplifting, emotionally moving things that are happening in terms of the environmental movement that we're not paying attention to. And all of these things are colliding for me in this instant, in this opportunity, right? And for me, that's the message to a lot of people, is that this is an opportunity. This is a moment in time that we can elevate not only ourselves, but the people around us in dialogue, in conversation, in collaboration, in coexistence, right? And so I feel like it's gonna happen like a fucking blink of an eye, and nobody's gonna see it coming. And the people on this line that are having this dialogue and this conversation are gonna understand, and I think you guys already understand, that we are in this moment together. And if we don't act together, we die together. So for me, that's where I'm at around change and how fast it goes, when it happens. It's going to happen in the blink of an eye. And one of the things that I'm very clear about is German history. And a lot of Americans cannot see that the playbook our president is reading from is Hitler's playbook. Every step in line in tow. He has followed every fucking roadmap in that book. And it is terrifying. And when the change comes, like, a lot of people don't believe me when I say November's gonna be a fucking bear, because if he loses, we're gonna be in trouble. If we win, we're gonna be in trouble, right? And so if we're not preparing for this moment where power transitions to whoever becomes our next president, we're gonna be fucked. And I deeply believe, because he's playing from Hitler's playbook, this moment is going to be critical to our country. It's going to be critical to our country. If he is allowing white people to go out, be in my fucking neighborhood for damn near 3 weeks and patrol so they can recruit white supremacists, if he's allowing that, they're riding around down here with guns and shit, you know, he is allowing that. If he does not become president, he still has 2 whole months to cause damage, right? 2 whole months before the next president is actually in place. And those 2 months, if he has power of the army, he has power of the Coast Guard, he has fucking power, right? Those 2 months are gonna be critical. And so I think a lot about, like, why am I here? You know, like, in my lifetime, why am I here? Why in this point in human history, what the fuck, dude, you know? And so I just keep thinking that there is a reason, and there was a reason that he became president, to wake us the fuck up, right? And that's where I'm at with art, is like, how can I use my art to wake you the fuck up? Like, to just like pull you out of your zone, you know? I don't know.
Right. I have so much that I want to respond to that, but I absolutely want to make sure that I'm not hogging the mic. Is there anything that you would like to say in response to this? Because we hit like a really great moment, and I want to make sure that everyone is sharing or having space too.
Well, it's you want to say something, Jamie?
Oh,
yeah, I wanted to say something.
Oh yeah. After you, Malaz, and So also has her hand up. Appreciate your creating the space, Barry. But go ahead, Malaz. Ladies first.
And I just want to say, God bless the 3 of you, because this is the most intelligent, wise conversation that I have heard in ages. And you are artists, and this is where the change is going to happen. It's going to happen through the artists. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys.
I think in my response, I'm going to have combined both Melissa and Carol statement together. So I'm actually here because of Trump. I wouldn't be here if Trump wasn't elected, because I'm Sudanese. And when I was about to leave the country, he installed the travel ban. So I got stuck in America.
Wow. Wow.
And as a result, I start questioning. I mean, like, why am I here? Like, how did I get caught in this crossfire of these two tribal war, you know? and then the question came in art. You know, I never identified as an artist before. I'm an architect, and I then, but I've always responded to things that problematic, that provocative, or they are like urgent in an artistic way. It's just I never identify that what I'm doing is actually art. And then my response to the fact that I was imprisoned here against my will, in a way, by truly trying to seek art and then saying, okay, so I'm here, there is a purpose. And I work with art and I work with community. And that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna create art with the community. And as a result, I've seen change. Even with little things, we're actually right now doing a huge campaign of art, environmental activism against the first public housing in America. Huge injustice. People cannot breathe. Children born with asthma, all because of corporate greed and environmental injustices that like deliberately created with racist policies and zoning. There's so many things in there that they're so complex that only art can unpack it. And I think this is that's when I realized there was like, when you said change is happening all the time, I think it is happening all the time, but sometimes there are windows that opens, and you know the right time is now, to act is now. And I feel artists have that natural impulse to then do it. And that's why they lead a lot of the change is happening, because as soon as they recognize that window, even if it's a small one, they try to kind of like put art into it, like shove and like make it wider and put the next piece of art into, sometimes like physically being there. I mean, we've seen in the history of artists, being sacrificed for change. They have put their bodies and their work, they jeopardize, they risk their life to open that, to widen that window. So having this conversation around it that's happening right now, it is the change. It is the window. This is the window. We are witnessing right now. We are in it. So and that makes me feel very, very hopeful that, and actually very happy that I feel like, oh, I'm here, well, because of Trump, so I can witness this. So I don't know, I'm a little bit thankful and grateful for Trump.
Yeah, that was brought up. That was brought up earlier, and this is something that I don't know that a lot of people know, that a lot of communities of color will talk about, that literally like this individual being in power has brought about the necessary conversations that need to happen because it's exposed the elephant in the room. I wanted to talk about this whole notion of change while we're on there. I'm in absolute agreement that like change can be in moments instantaneous. When I say moments, I think about the change in the mind. It's like my father told me something, you know, Carol, you had brought up earlier about not living in a racist society and then experiencing it when you were 11. You know, my daughter, she encountered racism whenever she went into kindergarten, which to me wasn't really a surprise. Like there could be oh, that sucks moment, but she went kindergarten, she comes home and she's like, something really weird happened. Like some girl told me she doesn't like me because I'm black and that she doesn't like black people. I'm not even black, because in her mind, she hasn't been conditioned to think of the melanin that makes up her skin as an absolute white or black, you know. So it was just one of those moments where I was able to impart the knowledge that my father had told me. And whenever I encountered racism growing up in the Midwest and in the South, where it's the worst, you know, he told me like, hey, because I went to school and the kids were calling me burnt boy when I was her age. And I came home and was like, yo, what's going on with this? And he said, like, you never let another person dictate your self-worth. He told me that is a youth, and it stuck with me forever. That change that you talked about, Carol, happened in an instant moment. I knew right there that I was armored up against anything that someone could say to hurt me. Like, I was full on ready for the war of life in that moment. When I talk about change being a little bit more of a long haul process, it's because as a collective consciousness, we're getting there to where everyone's starting to become awake to what's happening right now. The real change that needs to happen, which has not happened, and which is why we have words like systemic oppression, because it needs to happen on a legislative level. And people have forever used law to hold people back, forever. It is one of those things where if you write something into law, the whole process of undoing that law or bringing that law into existence takes so long. I mean, think about whenever 500,000 Black people signed up to go fight for World War II. Like, on their own will, they said, I want to go fight for this country, even though this country had been treating them historically bad. Sign up, go to the military, get treated like shit in the military while they signed up to fight for the country that they're in, get addicted to drugs that were introduced to them while they're fighting for the country that they're in. They come back home, said, we need housing. The whole idea of the 1948 Affordable Housing Act gets signed, does not go into existence for another 10 years. During that time, communities that started populating the areas where Black communities were at, pushed them out into what we now have through that timeline is the ghetto. So you introduce drugs, you introduce segregation, and you introduce inequality for housing, and you wonder why there's the existence of ghettos. And while you do bring up that poverty is down, there's still a lot of unwinding that needs to be done for things that have historically happened. So when I talk about change, I'm looking at what needs to happen on a legislative level. I said, like, just recently that the protest, the largest civil protest in history, was a great thing, but realistically, the fight starts now. That was just a lot of, okay, we're doing the walk to the ring for the fight. But now that everyone has sit back and said, like, okay, we're not protesting as much, we need to start the real fight now. And that needs to take place on a legislative level. And that needs to have things that are written into law, whereby if you call the cops on a Black person because you know that you can weaponize police against them and potentially get them killed, that's a hate crime. Once you start writing that to law that says, like, hey, that's a hate crime, you can no longer do that, the behaviors have to change because the laws need to be upheld. And that has always been the weapon that's been used against us as law. It's always been a very, very, very slow process. Even for someone that's a lawyer, they'll sit back and they'll tell you that, like, the best way to beat a client is just through time and through resources. It's like, make them wait it out. Even if someone gets put in jail or someone gets held hostage, you just make them wait it out. So that change, you absolutely are right. In the mind is happening in the moment, but it needs to happen on a legislative level. So I'm glad and I'm hopeful for change whenever I start to see these different states are deciding to defund police, redistribute funds, reorganize their executive boards. Those are the things that need to happen. So a lot of headlines are happening, but I want to see those laws be written into existence, because then that's when I feel like real change is going to happen. And unfortunately, I have to stand that I don't think that those things will happen like that. I think it will be a long, slow process. And during that time, they'll try to get people to forget about the most important fight that we're in right now.
I No, Barry, I don't agree.
Yeah, I don't agree either.
I want to have to say something. I don't agree based on the history of America. That it's a it's a law issue.
Legislation.
Yes, legislation issue. I don't agree, because we know from the history of America that when slavery was legal, and then it became by law that it's illegal to end that. People are focused like they have to end slavery. The people who are making those law moved it to make a new law that is Jim Crow, to make a new law that is something. So you are constantly chasing them while they are trying to figure out what is the next things that they can do to maintain the law, that they can do to maintain the status quo. So it is not really a change. That's my opinion. I think that's why it is so hard. They want you to think it's a change of law. So you're chasing the law. It's really a change of human. It's a change of power. Who is making the decision on defunding the police? Who is defunding the police? Who's making that decision? Now, when they do that, is it the community? Is it the people who are making that decision? Or is it the people who are in power who decided, we're gonna defund the police, but we are gonna start this community police initiative that has this sort of like power of to do this thing, and then you don't have the police problem, you have this new other problem that would maintain that same structure. Now, I think the hard part is to change people. That is the really tough mission. Can you actually change the heart of the people? And that's when I think the role of artist, of art, is the most important. Because you can, the changing the law doesn't change the people who makes the law. And knowing, learning, and keeping the history in mind, knowing that if tomorrow they stop, they erase it, like say hate crime for the law and to prevent it, the calling, they're gonna make another law that would allow another form of brutality to maintain the power structure. And to maintain, if that power structure means that we need more Black men in prison, we need more Black people in maintaining that, to maintain the status quo, to be in a certain places, to be in the ghettos, to be in that place, they will find another way, another form to create ghettos. They might not be the same form of the urban ghetto. They might be in a sort of like I can't really predict the future of what they would do, but in the same way that nobody who after the emancipation could predict the segregation that's going to happen afterward. They would thought that that's it. Once we get rid of that, law, the problem is going to get solved. But then what happened to the new law that they're going to keep introducing every time? So yeah, I think. Okay, Carol, it's your turn to disagree.
So I think the law is the tool of the 1% to manage the population, and it always has been. I mean, all the way back, right? And I also think that it can happen overnight. I don't think that is a fast. I mean, I think that there are certain things about being in that system that are slow. But when a law is actually written, shit happens really fast. You know, like the whole when that law about the police can enter your house without like justification, without you being there, all that kind of Homeland Security, that was the name of that law. That changed overnight, right? And one of the reasons why I say this is because I'm involved with the abolitionists of Pierce County, and we have made requests for them to defund the police and to put 50% of their budget into the community. resources like therapy and counseling and retraining and all that kind of stuff. And that happened overnight, right? And they're taking us seriously. You know, Pierce County Sheriff, the governor, the what is it? The Pierce County government. I can't remember what the last part of it is, but there's like 4 major groups that control Pierce County that are literally taking us serious, right? And I'm not saying that that's going to be the law, but I think things happen fast if it's community led. If we are connected and we are on the same page and we know what we want, right? Shit can happen really fast. It may take a while to get there. It may take, you know, but when it happens fast and it happens drastically. And I've seen that in my lifetime, you know. I don't know. That was my disagreement. I'm still sticking to happens fast.
Yeah, but I guess that, and this is, again, like why, and thank you so much for letting me be part of this, the Defiant Feminine, because like realistically, like, it speaks to the importance of balance, and like hearing both of your perspectives is very important and helps me to learn. I feel in a way we're all saying the same thing. It's, yes, the 1% is there, and yes, like while they did say that like, okay, slavery is now done and there were more laws put into act, but even the slavery is done to where we are now, one would think that if slavery was done into where we are now, we wouldn't be in the position that we are now. While we are in a better position than we've historically ever been, there are still problems that existed, that persisted during that time, that have carried over. So that's
more laws. Like, I mean, there's a lot of laws that have been put in place since Jim Crow. You know what I mean? Since
of course.
And so, I mean, it goes back to, I kind of feel like it goes back to what Liz just said about they're compounding the problem. And unless we understand that this is a problem that has been compounded generationally over the past however many years, hundreds of years, that African Americans that have been here in this country, I think for me, that's what's waking up. People are starting to see that this is not just a problem that's today, right? It's not just your mama's problem. It's your grandma's problem. It's your grandpa's problem. You know, it's all of our problem. And
that part.
If you stand in silence, you stand against it. That's how I feel, is that, you know.
1000% agree, that part. And that is why I sit back and say that, like, if we look at the history of the then to now, and I think it's really interesting, they talk about that there are no coincidences. Even if you look at like our grandma and our grandma's grandma, they were doing things similar to this before. Going back to the whole idea of the 1% always came in whenever it seemed like real change was on the horizon, and they eliminated it. I mean, think about Stokely Carmichael, Bobby Seale, John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. All of them were around at the same period, and they all were collectively trying to raise consciousness, and boom, 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 started taking them all out one by one. So that's where, I kind of circling it back around to the whole idea of the importance of art and activism is why it's so important that we create the works that we are now, because there is a chance that the work, the conversations, the community initiatives that we're doing now will create that butterfly effect that changes the world entirely. And it's so important that we put the work out, that we talk about it, that we write it, and that we document it, because historically, whenever that started to happen, I mean, think about whenever a country gets colonized, they come in, they take all the resources. There's so much, I think it's like, where is it? France that has all the art that's in Africa right now, and China had put up $4 billion to get it back. Why do they have the art that we made, and why won't they give it back? And I literally remember watching an interview where some gentleman said that, like, we don't know why we should give the people of Africa their art back, because we're the ones that said it was art, and we don't know what they'll do with it if we give it to them. What? Like, so that is where we, on a community level, when we talk about a collective consciousness and community action, why it is so important that we are moving as a singular unit. And I am 100% with you, Carol, that like it needs to be a collective. And if no one is, if someone's not doing anything, essentially you're against the movement. It needs to be a collective. We're 14% of the United States. Like, and if you talk about, what is there, 420 million people that are in the United States, you talked about 3% of that change. Like that's, while it seems like a small number, that's double-digit million people that need to collectively do something simultaneously for the world to change. It's a big initiative, but it can be done, and it's happening.
It's happening, you know. I mean, it's not like it's
happening.
It is happening, right? And even though we can't see who these like this 3% of the people are, it's happening. I mean, on this call, how many people do we have? You know, I don't even know, but like 8 or something.
11,
12.
More than that. Yeah, but I think in conversation, in dialogue, in community, in practice with each other, like these conversations is what is forwarding it, right? And one thing we got that Kennedy, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, all those cats didn't have is we got the internet. We got it. Unless our government shuts the fucking internet, which they're probably gonna have to do at some point, they're gonna shut the fucking web down.
Telling you.
This is an amazing tool for our generation, because not only can we connect with people in our country, we can connect with people in other countries that are struggling with the same fucking challenges and problems that we're challenging, right? And that to
we
me,
will tell you what to do when they cut your internet. We've been there before. We've been there before.
We better get the writing again or something. I don't know.
Right.
Keepers. But yeah, you know, and so, and I also think what's also critical about our generation, especially my generation, that I feel like my generation is this bridge between the future generation and the past generation, because my generation grew up without the internet, grew up without recording machines, grew up without microwaves, grew up without, so there's a lot of knowledge that is just inherent in how to survive apocalypse. Yeah.
100%.
You know,
yeah.
But I definitely think that this is a tool that we can utilize, and really trying to stay on top of what's happening is a challenge. I think that's probably one of our biggest challenges, is because there's so much stuff that is unreliable or hasn't been researched, or, but.
Right. So, I'm so sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm done.
So it was, so kind of moving us forward and talking about the idea of moving forward, I'm in agreement with you about, if we think it's crazy right now, once November gets here, oh my goodness, it's going to be, I can't even in my head wrap around what November is going to look like. But to that point, what are your thoughts on what this moment that we're in right now, the change that's happening, how that's going to affect November in elections? And just to add a little bit more in there, what happens if Trump gets elected again? Or what happens if Trump doesn't get elected?
Well, first of all, I don't get to see my family.
Oh, boy.
I'm like, please, American people, go to vote.
Yeah, like, whoa, like that part right there, that's an instant change. Like right there is such an important thing to note. Like, wow.
They've already been here 5 years. I already haven't seen them for 5 years. That's another 5 years. That's a decade. That's a decade.
You're ours now, right? You're here with us.
I think I'm just gonna accept the fact. That's it. I have to live with Trump. But I think the question is, you can imagine. Why can't you imagine, Barry? You are an artist. I think if you are not the one who's imagining, who can?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where the point is. It's not the point. It's not the place of fear. It's a place of action. You know, like creative thinking, critical thinking. We have 4 months from now until November. how artists are going to influence this present time and influence the future, and not wait for it to happen, like lead it, or like
Right.
push that window of change. If there is a little window for people to become more aware of our collective power or our need for change in political environment, then that's when arts goes in. Political art starts to like comes in a movement. I don't know. I mean, you've already started doing something.
I think for me, whenever I say that I can't imagine, I tend to amplify my thoughts into how that plays part into humanity as a whole. I think that, just being Black, I can always have an idea of what I can expect to be ahead of me, even though it's like, even in those moments where I was like, oh, I could die right now over something that's as minuscule as getting pulled over. But I think as I say, like, it's hard for me to imagine, because I think about how we're all pushing against the system right now. We're all saying, like, this needs to change. You need to do something. Stand up now. Like, we demand that this happens in this moment. And historically, and even like you know about this, you just brought it up. Like, if we continue at this rate where we overthrow the power structure will attack us. And that's where I say, I don't know what that looks like. Because Kara brought up how the government will play around and take the internet away from us. They'll do it. They'll as soon as we start to, our collective consciousness we're all rising up and say enough, then whenever they can't get to the brain, they'll just find a way to use more lethal weapons against us. So whenever I say, I'm very prescriptive when I say, like, I don't know what that will look like, because I don't know, if we're following Hitler's playbook, whenever they turn against us, I've never been in a place where our government has said that, like, enough of you all, we're going to start taking you out strategically. It's always been a systemic way to hold us back, but not in an absolute, I'm coming directly at you because you said and done enough. And I'm there for that fight. Make no mistake, I am there for that fight. It's instilled in me, and I'm here for it until the end. But as I speak about the collective, what happens with humanity there? What do they do?
I think this comes here, the role of allyship. And that's when the joint fight becomes critical, because with allyship comes power. And a lot of people currently are in place of power. They are currently part of that structure. And if we can cultivate this allyship now in this new era, the same way that allyship was marshaled with MLK. It's different now. We have, like you said, we are in a new revolution. We are in the tech revolution. We have AI. We have internet. There's a lot of different elements here. And I think here, when I would like to hear from the allies what they see can happen, because they are going to be talking from a place that is different than a place of resistance, but a place of access to resources, to a certain type of power and privilege. And what can happen? I don't know. Maybe a collective people collectively giving up their privilege. Collective mass resignation. I don't know. Then exchange of power, flipping the system all over, like making something that is. It has to come from them. I can't think of it. I can't think it for someone. They have to come from their place. So I want to hear from someone who think they are an ally, how they can use their energy there.
I think this is a beautiful opportunity to invite everyone else into the conversation. Thank you so much for bringing that, Malaz and Barry, because this is where I was going to be. We've had a conversation last week on our segment Beacons of Color where we talked about allyship, and we talked about those of us that have privilege. It's not enough to just acknowledge the privilege, it's what we're doing with the privilege. How do we contribute with the privilege, and how do we turn that focus around instead of looking up and looking, you know, side to side? So I would like this opportunity to start inviting questions or comments from everyone else that's here.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you, Barry, Malaz, and Carol. And So's got her hand up. We have a couple of people who have questions, if you guys are down with that. So so if you wanted to comment, and then Brett also has his hand up, and I know Jamin also wants to say something. Thanks.
Carol, particularly, I just want to say a couple of things that will endorse what you're saying about change happening very, very quickly. You probably read it, but I think it was John Reed's 10 Days That Shook the World about the revolution. And there was a little piece in there, I think it's that book, don't quote me on it, but the essence is good enough. And basically, he, the writer, observed revolution. So it was literally overnight. The people were asleep. They woke up overnight, like they'd had a kiss me awake kiss. And suddenly their brains were working at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And everybody was devouring. They couldn't get enough material to devour. People who'd never been bothered with books before it happened overnight. There's another thing I want to say in relation to, like, you're all talking about the role of the artist. And there's something about art and this sudden change. I just want to quote it. So I'm just going to get a page up. And it's this. It's a definition of catharsis. A purification or purgation of the emotions, such as pity and fear, primarily through art. Second definition, a purification or purgation that brings about spiritual renewal or release from tension, and elimination of a complex by bringing it to consciousness and affording it expression. Now, that can happen en masse. It can happen quickly. I think it's happening now, and that's what I think. And the other thing I wanted to say, like, I like to be kind of under the radar in loads of things that I do. So I guess I am an artist, but I rarely call myself one. But in this context, I'll call myself an artist. And I write a lot of poems. I do painting and stuff like that occasionally, all kinds of things. But years ago, something really, really stuck in my mind about art, and the art form was the poem. And somebody said the poet's work happened long before it ever reached the page. So whatever you're doing as an artist, you can't help it. You don't even have to have a paintbrush. You're doing it all the time. You're putting it out there. You're thinking it in every conversation, everything that you're doing, that art is going out there. And sorry, there's just one little point, another point I want to make. I was involved with a group of poets years ago, and we were always sidelined because we were social realists. We were the social realist poets, the political poets. We wanted to talk about issues. We wanted to talk about what was going on in the community. And we were always like, oh, we were the brutalists. We were the, they were doing their fancy, sweet poetry and all that. And we were always sidelined. But at times like this, the social realist artists, they are, just as Black Lives Matter is center stage at the moment, the social realist artists are center stage. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Or maybe they want to answer.
Yeah, I don't know if our guests want to speak to that, or should I call Brett? No, okay, Brett, you're on.
Hey everybody, thank you for the awesome conversation. I'm glad I just got a chance to listen instead of talking as much as I usually do and just actually sitting back and on my couch and listening. It was really wonderful, especially the artist perspective. I was just talking to my friend a couple of days ago about, the sort of occupied nature of what's going on in Seattle right now. And, the point came up that you were just speaking to, Barry, and everyone, really, that at any point, let's just say the powers that be, whatever word you want to use, when they decide to shut something down at this time in nature, when they have, let's say, the guns and the tanks and all, and we're all kind of more in the nonviolent space, et cetera, they're going to do what they want to do. I believe Martin Luther King was assassinated when he started talking about economic reform compared to all the other. I'm not an expert in that, but just the point being, they will do what they do when they, they'll do what they want to do when they want to do it. So how do we respond, to that is a really big question. I do think art is a big thing because we can subversively do a lot of things, but still the day comes when they decide to go, they can kind of manhandle that. So my question was, what came up for me was, does anybody know of any movements or groups who are actively addressing the soldiers and the police forces to bring them into conversation? Because what really angers me more than anything, even thinking about Hitler, my family's Jewish, so I heard a lot of those stories. I don't care about the one figurehead that puts the orders out. It's the people that follow the orders, to me, that are sad, that I feel sad and angry about, like the people that follow orders and have, the wealthy, privileged, mostly white people, they don't even send their kids to the military, right? They give the orders, and then all these poor people, black, white as well, go to war and carry out all these orders. So that's a political point. I'm more interested if anyone actually knows, something happening. And if not, that should be on the highest priority list for all of us as artists and activists and humanitarians, as really starting to communicate with and create whatever safe containers necessary, and also bringing veterans in to start shifting hearts and minds in all those spaces. Because I'll tell you what, if there's a movement there, and I'm sure there's good people in these spaces that join the military and police before they realized what they were doing, to me, that was where you would shift that part of the narrative, because they won't carry out the orders of those people if there was enough capacity. So I was just curious if anyone's heard of that or involved in anything like that.
I think that point, Brett, that was that was brought up by Malaz earlier, is like, that is what real allyship looks like, is whenever we do have those communities that are working in conjunction with these different groups to create the change that needs to happen. It's a really interesting thing, a lot of the beliefs that are happening with the police that are kneeling with protesters or kneeling in front of protesters. Looks like Carol just put a link in as well. But it's one of those things where that's where the real change absolutely has to happen. It's been brought up by everyone here that this isn't something that can be done on a singular level. The 14% of us can't do it, like numbers wise, and more important than numbers wise, resources wise, it just wouldn't work out. So that's what Laz brought up earlier about, it's like allies, supporters, advocates, like it's a collective conscious fight. And until we collectively are like, we can do this, we're ready, we're prepared, let's go after it, I think that's where a lot of the change that we keep bringing up, where it can be stagnant, is if we don't collectively come together.
Brett, I wanna answer you. Oh, Carol, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that I definitely agree with you, Brett. And there's lots of different ways to look at that. One of them for me is, like, I've been telling my friends recently, and they just kind of laugh. They kind of laugh. It's like a nervous laugh every time I say this. So it'd be interesting to see what you guys think. But like, I have said probably in the past month numerous times that one of the ways that I could definitely feel like an actual change would be if the anarchists and the Proud Boys actually were in a room and actually had a mediator that forced them to have these conversations and have these talks, right? Because that is the they're the polar opposite. And if they could get on the same fucking page, maybe the rest of the country could get on the same page. That's very difficult to do. It's very, I mean, you don't want to be in a room with your enemy, right? Like, but I don't know how to make that happen. I don't know what that looks like. All I know is that shit's gonna hit the fan one way or the other. And what does that look like? You know, like, do I need to go out and buy a gun? Do I need to go out and get some bow and arrows? That's my thing, is I think I'm just gonna get a bow and arrow. But it's like, I know that I have access to my community of artists, and I have access to the people that are supporting me in my life. But will I have access to them if the shit hits the fan, if the grid goes down, if, you know, all those things are very prevalent in my thinking around change and what happens when change happens, right? And change does not always happen peacefully.
Right.
Right? Usually,
100%.
you have to take it, right? You got to take the power. And so having those kinds of conversations and dialogues are very challenging and scary if you know you're having these conversations with people who don't agree with you, right? And there are a lot of people who want to keep the status quo because they are benefiting from it. But the other thing I want to say before I shut my mouth is that I just sent a link, and I highly encourage everybody to watch this movie. It's called Breaking Down a Dictator, and it's the story of the nonviolent opposition movement that toppled the regime in Slobodan Milosevic. I can never say that. And it's extremely powerful in the aspect that this community was able to get the military on their side. And it was through dialogue, it was through conversation, it was through story sharing, it was through treating the military like they were people, which I know is a very hard concept, especially for the movement that's happening right now. But it shows how if you get power on your side, you can take down anything. You can do anything. And so that's all I want to say is it's a really good movie. I encourage everybody to watch it.
Well, I want to say something to Carol. Maybe those conversations might not be able to, and to Brett as an answer to his question, but so maybe those conversations might not be able to happen in a room. However, I think they can happen in a van. As a matter of fact,
that's a really good idea.
No, I did. I just put the link downstairs, down in the chat room. I don't know if other people doing it. I'm pretty sure other people doing it, but I am doing that, Brett. So I decided that this is one way that I want to contribute as an artist, and I converted I'm actually in the middle of doing it. So the link is there. I'm converting a van into a mobile recordings and video storytelling studio. And it's every time there is a series of an issue that I'm talking about. And one of this issue that one of the series that I'm talking about is police and what it means, and the idea and the concept came from me doing a lot of architecture work and engagement with the community and hearing those different voices. But sometimes I used to do that by driving Uber into the neighborhood, because I get to people that I wouldn't otherwise go and reach from both sides, from different people. It's such a democratic way to kind of like just suddenly like meet strangers and be forced to be in this intimate space by the fact that you trusted them in your space. They trusted you to be in your space. So there is that kind of like head start that I sort of like exploited, and then allowed me to have these conversations and hear different opinions, and as a result create solutions or design that encapsulate this kind of shared vision. Now, so I'm doing the Haboba van, which is the project that I'm doing to have conversation with different people together. So the inside of it is going to be an interview space, a storytelling space. There's cameras and there is a media, so people are actually going to be following those conversations. And so when we talk about the police, we're interviewing officers. We are talking about retired officers, different generations, new ones, older generations, and but also community members, victims, people who are being on very opposite sides of each other at the same time, and having that. So I don't know if that's not such a like a big initiative. It's just one small thing in the circle of things happening. So because I do believe it is change comes from empathy, and change comes from creating a means to have that dialogue. And art, like I said, art is usually like a very it's not an easy subject. Sometimes it's really hard for people. Art can be very hard. The art can be very brutal, and it opens you up into times when you don't need it. But also, I like to think of it as a very nice. Sometimes it's a very nice wave to carry you a little bit of load from all the complexities. So having you in a van outside of your world, kind of like already takes you a little bit away from all of the noises, and you're forced to see the human being that is in front of you as a human. And I'm cooking. I'm actually going to be cooking for people and feeding them and talking. So I'm doing human actions there. It's not something that technical, sterile. It's very organic. It's very natural. I do acknowledge you being a human in my space, and I'm going to be generous to you. I'm offering you something, and we'll see what comes back of it. So maybe a little small project. It's not a big initiative, but a small one.
That's a really beautiful project. I love it. And if I could just jump in, Barry, it looks like you wanted to say something. Is that cool? Thanks. So Carol posted something that I read on Facebook this morning about snowflakes, and that really spoke to me. And Carol, you'll describe it better than me, but basically it's about how snowflakes, each one of them has its own individual characteristics, and yet they're part of this collective snow flurry. And as we're all coming down as little snowflakes out of the sky, different things happen to us. So sometimes we collide into another snowflake and we become a partnership, or sometimes a lot of us collect and we become a snowdrift, and each time we come down as a snowflake and we collide and we combine, we're changed by that intersection. And so I just wanted to bring that up as a metaphor for this conversation about our actions and how can we affect change and help be part of the transformation here on the planet, which I personally believe is going to happen anyway, because it's a spiritual revolution that's happening on the planet, as well as a physical one that we see with our human senses. And so I believe it's going to happen anyway. I think coronavirus is indicative of that. It's like this tiny little thing just hit the pause button for us, because we could do it for ourselves. Having said that, I think that small projects and big projects are all valuable. And I just wanted to share quickly a story, because as those of you who know me, I'm very much focused on saving non-human species, whether they're plant or animal, and all my art is focused on that. And up the street from where we live here on Whidbey Island, a 14-year-old unnecessarily shot multiple times and killed a raccoon that was protecting his babies and his wife. And my neighbor came and banged on my door because she knows I'm an activist for wildlife. And she said, Mel, you got to go and talk to them. And I'm like, oh, shit. I really wanted to brush it under the carpet. I didn't want confrontation, but my bigger self got hold of me and goes, you got to do something. So I got up my courage and I walked up the street I knocked on the door of the house and introduced myself. And I started talking about what had happened, asking them why, and really challenging the action they took. And that created a lot of conflict, actually. The family, they have children, other children. The children used to greet me. They stopped talking to me. They would turn and sort of shun me. And I was like, well, that's okay. I'm going to just leave that for right now because I've got the message out there and it's going to do its work. I don't know how. I'm not attached to the outcome. I just know I had to be the messenger. Well, I also went to PAWS and I got printouts from PAWS about how to scare off raccoons without having to kill them. Like you can bang pots together or shine bright lights at them and they'll take off. So I handed these out to the kids and they tore them up and put them on my car window screen. So I knew I had touched a nerve and that was going to start working on these kids and the neighborhood. 6 months later, it took that long. One of the children, actually the kid who shot the raccoon, came up to me and said, "Excuse me, I'd like to have a conversation with you. I'd like to hear your side of the story." And so change started happening. And he explained how his family are hunters. And so he was brought up differently. But we had this incredible conversation where his consciousness could change. And it was up to him to bring that change. The reason I'm telling this story is because going back to what you were talking about, Barry, or Carol, about, talking to the police and the military. I think that we can affect change by talking and sharing stories from person to person, as well as collective actions. And one of the things I would like to propose to you as a friend and an ally and an accomplice, my new word, thanks to Irasema, is I think we should do a campaign together. And I have this idea where I want to do, those signs that politicians use that have the little metal legs, right? I think the Office of Arts and Culture did Art in the Neighborhood using those. I think we should do some kind of word campaign where we're printing words or art on those and put them everywhere. I want to start this on Whidbey Island, going up from the ferry where there are words like Black Lives Matter, unity, compassion, caring for all of life. We can all put our hearts into this, but we need to share our thoughts, our words, and our artistic natures with the world. And I love the idea of collaborations. And I think the more of these we can do together, the better. And let's just spread this out into the world. Also, the great thing about the internet is we can all connect with people around the world and create projects as well through Zoom.
I love that. I love that what you said about putting arts out. I'm the designer for the Cleveland Black Lives Matter signs here. So I've designed like a lot of that I go around and I see a lot of the signs that I designed there, and I'm sick of it. Not because of the message. I like the message. I'm just like, I think we should do more. I think the message itself is good, but I would love to see more art out there, more people having a dialogue through DC art signs. Even if you're not going to have a dialogue straight through a medium, that's still a dialogue that's going to start there. This is something that is about me. You know where I stand. You know what I like. You know me, and that's something that I'm invested in a very larger goal. So I would love that. Yeah.
Let's do it. Jamin.
100%.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Barry.
No, go ahead. 100%. I was just agreeing.
All righty. I want to welcome back Sarah and Danny and Ron and Mark. Welcome one, welcome all. It's a couple minutes past the top of the hour, and that's okay. I mean, this is such a great conversation. And I had spoken with Brett previously, who's our next speaker, and he's flexible, so we don't have to stop right away. This is the conversation that we need to be having. And I want to comment on a few things that were said. First, Carol, when you basically said, in my mind, I frame it this way: transformation happens in an instant, right? In the mind, poof, in an instant. And the vehicle, one of the key vehicles for this transformation and this revolution is exactly what is happening right here, right? We have a bunch of people from different backgrounds, different countries, different perspectives, and we're all coming together and talking with each other and listening. And it's a very safe space for two reasons. One, because it's a video conference, but more importantly, because we are pioneering a culture here of radical inclusivity, radical equality. Everyone's voice is just as important as everyone else's. And this is something, quite frankly, which is very new in the American experience, where people are divided according to class, according to race, according to so many ways that we can divide people, political divisions, you name it. And so this blink of an eye transformation that Carol talks about, for me, the blink is a multi-week, at most multi-month blink that we are right in the midst of right now. And a big part of the blink is happening literally right here, right now, in this network of conversations that we're creating that is bringing people together and mashing up different groups of people in very positive ways. And Carol, I love what you said about bringing together, I forget it is the Proud Boys and the anarchists, and bring the different and the Black Lives Matter and bring them together and say, hey, let's talk. We actually do that right here. We have vegans who are passionately vegan, right? And non-vegans, and conversations are happening that are actually compassionate. We have people who believe that climate change should be addressed with drawdown, and then people like me who believe it should be addressed with SRM, and we get into it, right? So any combination you can imagine, we can put together here, and we can start to sort stuff out. Because the bottom line, I believe, the real revolution is all of us realizing, wait a second, we are all people, right? And talking with you, Carol, and meeting you several months ago, and hearing you, if you don't mind me repeating the statement, I blank people. I'm happy to say it if you want, but I won't if you don't. Just give me a thumbs up or thumbs down. She said, look, I hate to say this to you guys, but I hate white people, right?
And she said, I fucking
hate white people. And
but I love you, right?
yeah. And and you know what? This is what these are the icebreakers that need to happen, and in a safe space they can happen. Now, another thing I want to mention is it was mentioned that Martin Luther King Jr. got assassinated when he started talking about economic reform and economic issues and whatnot. Well, check this out. Our very next 2-hour segment following the Divine Feminine is a segment led by Brett. Raise your hand, Brett, so everyone can see you. Thank you. Called A World Without Money, and creating a new game. Talk about getting to the heart of it. Talk about getting to the root of this oppression. It's the very idea that we can own anything: land, people, property, money, right? That we can incarcerate people, all this. And so there are radical ways to get to the roots of that. All of this is happening in the same blink of an eye that Carol mentioned. It's all happening, and it's happening by people coming together. And as people come together and we co-create this collective intelligence, which is rapidly evolving towards a collective super intelligence, which is what we get when humanity comes together in this network of conversations, and we're able to jump from conversation to conversation, and it is safe and it is respectful, right? Because those are the rules, right? That we co-create here together. That will create such a powerful intelligence that it will run circles around the governments of the world and basically say, look, here's what the people are demanding. And either you do it by making the change happen right now, according to these, boom, 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 these changes happen right now, or it's full on revolution. And since we have the collective super intelligence, we get to guide and direct the revolution as a collective force, way more intelligent than anything that's been assembled before, because it's all of us coming together. Anyway, those are the points I wanted to make. And I'll go on mute and hand it back to our moderator. Thank you.
I wanted to say,
Can I show you something really fast? Is that okay, you guys?
Yeah.
Okay, so the reason I'm showing you this is because of what Mel just mentioned about the signs. I'm gonna share my screen if you guys will allow me to do that. Is it shared? Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see it, Carol.
So in 2017, I was a part of a group called the Artifacts, and we were doing protests against the New Deal. And basically, I came up with this design. I don't know if that's big enough, but these signs. So we came up with this concept that the soil in the ground that we walk on is polluted. And so I designed this logo with the bars and the hands. And I also, we also came up with just 50 words that changed on each sign. And on this particular sign, it says Social Class Branding Center. And then we took all these signs, as you can see, we started to place them in the grass all around the juvie jail so that you could see them from far away. And here are some of the words that are on these ones. When you're talking about putting signs out, I think like combining it with some form of imagery that's consistent would be really powerful. And one of the things that people told us after seeing these signs is that they had never thought about generational oppression, generational financial breakdown of like, you know, zoning and all that other stuff. And so I think there's a way to bring awareness to people in an art action that could be really simple, you know? So that's all I wanted to say about that. And I agree with you, Shaman. And I agree with you.
Yeah, that's a beautiful project, Carol. What gave me the idea is Jamin and I were out walking the other day, and the county here sprayed Roundup on the plants on a bridge that we cross, and I just broke my heart because it's right next to a creek and right next to a marsh where I know there are frogs and wild birds, and that's going straight into the water and straight into the ground and killing the environment. So I thought I wanted to do, it's funny you're saying warning atrocity toxin. This is kind of really what was in my head. And so there's these two virus or attacks happening. One is on people, one's on the planet, and they're interconnected. And so I think it would be so fantastic if we could get that going where we're talking about these two oppressions that are happening. Love it.
And
that for me, that'd be
great. Barry, you had something to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, which I meant to say at the beginning, but we started going. I just want to say thank you so much for this opportunity. And to everyone that's on this call, whenever we talk about how difficult navigating these really important conversations are, it just doesn't pertain to race. Like, even getting the invite to be on this panel to speak with such amazing artists as a man going into a space for the divine feminine, I really had a hard time, because even my words and understanding the power of the divine feminine, the power of women, is still something that is a lifelong journey for me to understand, and just making sure that I'm making space safe so that I'm not being toxic, or that I'm not mansplaining, or just doing all just the stupid shit that like men can do. So I just want to say that like a lot of the most important things that bring about change are never easy to do. The whole universal collective consciousness coming together, creating pathways to be able to work with different communities. I absolutely believe that we should definitely have moderators and mediators in place to be able to help us create conversations with like people that notoriously wouldn't work with us. That's a really brilliant idea that needs to happen. And none of this is ever easy. And as a creative, that's what we signed up to do. So I just want to honor everyone that's allowed me to speak here. It's such a hard thing to be able to do. And I'm just super appreciative of you all for letting me do this. Like, genuinely, at the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for this.
Barry, brother, I just got to say this as the founder of the block party here, Collective Intelligence Block Party. Barry, we need you here. We need you here a lot. I would love it if you were here all the time. And so we do the block party every Friday, Saturday, starting at 6 a.m. Friday morning for 24 hours. And then immediately after, we have something called The Conversation, which goes for another 24 hours. And I don't expect you to stay up 48 hours every weekend, Barry. I'm sure you need your sleep just like I do. Yeah, but part of the reason we're doing this is we need to set aside the time to have these long form conversations. We're now 2 hours and 15 minutes into this conversation, and it feels like we're just getting started, right? So my vote to the divine feminine leadership who lead this segment is let's bring these rock stars back again and again and again, and let's keep having this conversation until we've reached the conclusions we need to reach, and it's time for action, right? In the meantime, I invite everyone here, our guests, everyone, to stick around. This we say it better in Spanish. I'm Hispanic, and so the Mexican culture is my culture of choice. Mi casa, tu casa, estás en tu casa. This is your home. This is your home. Just make yourself comfortable, right? Food's in the kitchen, bongs in the back, keep it on the down low. This is a 24-hour block party. And we're here to connect, right? We're here to have fun. And we're here to realize that, wait a second, Carol, you're my sister. I'm your brother, right? And I am so sorry for anything and everything that's happened to you at the hands of any white people anywhere. Those are not my brothers. You are my sister. They are not. And what we're finding here is we are all one family, one big human family. We were born into a very messed up situation where we're taught that, that person's different from you. So you got to be careful with those people. You got to be careful with those people. And by the way, I never heard any of that talk ever in my growing up in the San Francisco Bay Area up through the age of 12. I had to learn about racism and hear that talk where? Seattle, Washington. When I moved up here to live with my mom, I had to move to Seattle. In California, my best friend was black.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean it didn't exist. Just
I'm not
in your sphere, you didn't see it, because I was born in Stanford, and I was very well aware of no people of color in my school.
Well, no, it's true. I grew up in a bubble. The East Bay of the San Francisco Bay Area in the 70s and 80s was a bubble where I literally had no contact with racism in that time. But that's
I have to head out.
Pardon?
But I have to leave because I have to go work on the van.
Yes.
Someone's gonna. But I wanted to say, leave you with a kind of like a story that connects what you just said, Jamin, and also what Barry shared earlier about his first incident of racism as a child, and what his father told him, that don't let anybody tell you who you are. And for what Carol just said, now I'm raising a black child in America, and my son is 7 years old, and I don't want to raise him in a bubble, because that's a privilege to be able to raise someone in a bubble.
Yeah.
It means as a black person, you can't escape racism. You just can't escape. But I haven't had that conversation with him about racism, about like what it is yet. I'm waiting for him to be he's a very smart child, like you said, but I'm waiting for him to develop a childhood that it's kind of like normal in a sense of that. But when we had the Black Lives Matter protest in Cleveland and the riots that happened afterward, I woke up the next day with barricades outside my house. I live very close to the downtown where the area happened. And two military Humvees right outside my door, and 4 police cars. I'm the only black person in my street. It's an affluent, gentrified neighborhood. And I'm the only black person. And my son was out on a trip camping. And and his dad was dropping him home. but I was so scared to walk out of my house to the next block where cars can actually come to pick up my son and return to my house. I was so scared of what's going to happen if I step a foot outside my house and I'm immediately seen as the wrong person in the wrong place. With these two big military trucks, knowing that what military can do, with 4 police cars, knowing what police can do, and having my son to have that conversation for the first time during what is happening now. I'm forced to have it with him. So I didn't want to tell my son that don't let anybody tell you, because that's not how I grew up. That's not my Sufi philosophy. My Sufi philosophy is about community. Yes, you get your value from your community. That is part of who I am. So what I did, I reached out to the community, to my community. I wrote to our community group in Facebook, and I said, I need to get my son home. And I need you to help me do that. And all my neighbors who are white allies, and I asked if one person could do that, could walk with me to get my son home. And I wake up and I leave my house, I step out of the house, and all my neighbors are outside. And they all walked with me to my son, who happens to have his first bike ride. So he came back with an entourage of like people behind him while he's leading us in his first bike ride, all cheering for him, all showing him real love. And unforced and pretentious. It was community love. So when my son asked me why the police here is here, why the military is here, and I said, because Black people have been hysterical. And he said, why they hate Black people? And I said, well, they do. There are people who hate and there are people who love. And we always gonna exist in a world where both facts are gonna exist, are gonna be there. And I'm so glad that I was able to show him the fact of that people who loved him. And not only, my reality didn't only exist of only the people who hate. So thank you so much for having me here. I appreciate this moment. I feel like it's part of that reality that tells me there are people here who care genuinely about what I have to say in this world, what difference I can make here. And it balances a lot of the time realities when we are systemically outside of these conversations, these important conversations. So thank you so much.
Malaz, thank you so much for being here and sharing your spirit with us, and all your beauty and everything you're doing is so amazing. Jamin wants to say something before you go, but I also want to put the challenge to you, Barry, Carol, and myself, and anyone else who wants to join us, that we do the word campaign thing, that we kind of collaborate together across the United States and do a project together. I think that would be so awesome. So I'm going to challenge you three to this.
Yeah. And I just want to reiterate, Barry, Carol, Malaz, we need the three of you again and again and again, and all together with all of us, because there's something just absolutely magical about the combination of the three of you here in the Divine Feminine. So please make this your home. Come back. You can come and go as you wish. And that's true for everyone here. Just come and go. Because, we need to hit, people have other stuff they need to do. So just don't feel badly about that at all. And Malaz, I know you need to get going, so I'm going to let you off the hook.
Love you.
Yeah. Check out our van campaign and donate to us too.
Okay. Did you put something in the chat for that,
Malaz? I did put the link, yes.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Soon. Love you.
Thank you. It was so a pleasure seeing all of you.
Thank you, Malaz. So great to see you again. All righty. Well, it is now 11:24, so we're about 24 minutes overtime, which is
Yay.
okay. Are we in a good place to take maybe just like a 5-minute break and then rejoin, at which point Brett will be presenting? Does that sound about right?
Yeah, and just to finish, I don't know if Carol or Jackie had any final words, or Barry, he's still here, I see, before we transition. Thank you, guys and gals.
Nothing on my part. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Barry.
Thank you, Barry.
I just want to address the comment that was said earlier about I hate white people. So I think that was in a moment that was very tragic for me, and you guys were there with me to support me through that moment. And just generally, a racist incident had just happened to me, and it was very traumatic, and I'm still reeling from it. And it happened in December. So I just wanted to put that out there, that like there are moments that I do fucking hate white people, and if there are white people that can't take that statement, for me, it's a learning moment for them. And I'm at the point in my life where I'm kind of done explaining why. I'm kind of done accepting that I am not allowed to feel that way. But on the flip side, I have amazing white friends that are allies and accomplices, and I'm really grateful to be able to be a part of this conversation, and this gives me hope. So I want to thank both you guys for putting this on. Yeah, that's all I want to say. Thank you.
We love
And
you.
I'll very quickly just conclude with, it can be lonely to bring about these conversations. It can be, it takes an amount of courage to stand up and say, we need to have these conversations. Can we bring this to this forum, to this platform? And we've talked about emotional labor. And I have to say that it is this community where I can invest the emotional labor into my white brothers and sisters, because this is the forum, this is the platform where I know we can come together and we can bring about change. And I am just as hopeful. And Carol, it is to hear your voice and hear your passion and hear how unapologetic you are. That brings me hope. That brings me like inspiration, and it fires within me. And I'm so honored, and I'm so grateful that you're here, that you're doing your work. And I just want to support you any way I can, and hopefully one day call you my friend, because I think you're amazing. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, beautiful. And James has his hand up. Go for it, James.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, I just wanted to say enjoyed every bit of the conversation, and I second that what Jackie just said anyway, so I'll keep it short. I just wanted to say to Carol as well, I admire your honesty, and as an Irishman, I grew up in a situation where I grew up born into a situation where we were taught to hate English people because of the tyranny in our country. And it had nothing to do with colour of skin, it was just nationality. But it was still inbred hatred at the same time. And that is it, at the end of the day, that is the essence where it comes down to hatred. It comes down to what has been instilled in our children and what is instilled in our children. And so therefore, that's why it's important for all of us to be here and to learn. We all know our mistakes. We all know the mistakes of the past. Now, I grew up hating English people until I became, a young adult, and I ended up having no other choice but to travel to England to find work back in the early 80s. And I soon found out that I didn't hate English people at all. I hated the English establishment, because it's the establishments that cause all the fucking mess anyway. And I agree with you, and I love your honesty, because to be honest with you, I fucking hate a lot of white people too, to be honest. You know what I mean? So thank you very much, and I hope you do come back here again, because I really love the conversations. Thank you.
Beautiful, James. Thank you. All right. And for the record, I fucking hate most white people too. So not you. Okay. So shall we take a few minute break? And Brett,
I didn't get to say I hate white people.
well, say it now, sister. Say it loud.
Oh, thank you.
All right.
And I just want to actually say quickly one thing about community. Carol, I think it was you who brought up about community and why, oh no, maybe it was Malaz, why white people can't work in community in the same way that people of color can. And like yourself, Carol, I grew up in Europe with my sister, and Europeans are very community minded. From my experience, I grew up on a Greek island and everything is done in the community. So for me, that was just second nature. It's natural. So when I got back to the US, I had the same kind of experience you had. I'm like, what's going on in this country? This is weird. There's no community. There's no family structure. People are segregated, divided. I didn't understand it. And I still don't understand it. And so yeah, I think we are rebuilding community structure amongst us, and that's a beautiful thing.
Can I respond to that really quick? Is that okay? I know we're trying to get off of here. Yeah, I ditto everything that you just said. And it's interesting because when I came here, I didn't realize that my experience was that important until I was about 40 years old. So I just turned 50. So only about 10 years ago did I realize how important my childhood was in terms of racism, in terms of nationality, in terms of my perspective on the world. The only education that I had that was not alternative was my high school. So my college, my elementary, all my years have been spent in alternative education where it's a communal experience. I mean, Germany is designed to be communal, the walkways, the brick, the community spaces. And it's so funny because I didn't know that was a part of my system of beliefs until I was a much older adult and really understood segregation and the redlining zoning and, the burning down of Black Wall Street and all these things, right? And so I have come to a place where there are people that are teachable. There are people that want to know. There are people that are open to learning. And those are the type of people that I want to be in communion with. I have one of my friends is like, well, why don't you just get a job in an institution and work in the institution from the inside out? And my answer to that is the system is broken. I don't even think it can be fixed. I mean, I literally think it all just needs to fucking burn down and we need to start the fuck over. And so I have a hard time believing that a system that's been built on segregating, burning down social engagement, burning down places where, there is a communal feeling where you don't have to pay to enter, right? It's not based on your financial access. I just don't believe that system can be rebuilt. And I just don't believe that it can, I just think I just think Americans in our culture has permeated the rest of the world, and they've accepted the bad parts of our country. And I just don't know that it can be, I just don't know, I just don't know. I would rather start all over sometimes, but that's a difficult thing to say because I know that means violence. It probably means murder. It probably means all these things that we don't want to think about. But I don't know, like when people talk about let's reform the police, I don't believe that we can reform the police. The police were created, the historical research that I've done is that the police were created to run down and catch slaves. How can that system be revamped? How can you change that value? I don't see that. So anyway, I think that's all.
Thank you, Carol. Yeah, at all. Yeah, that's right. Right on. Myra has her hand up. Myra, are you still there?
Hi, yes, I'm here. I'm sorry, I missed the Divine Feminine. I'm busy with school.
Welcome. We missed you.
I miss you guys too. I wanted to say very briefly that as I hear many people hurting and saying, I hate and I hate and I want it all burned down. And I just wanted to express my feelings towards that. I don't hate. I love. I decided a long time ago to love and accept, and that the only way we could change this situation is when we change ourselves and when we heal ourselves. Because if we don't, we are only spreading hate. So it all starts within ourselves. And I just wanted to say that I love you all, and I don't care what color you are. I don't care what culture you are, where you come from. I love you because we all have the same essence. We all are one in essence. And that's what makes us all the same, no matter what. So we need to learn how to heal. We need to learn how to spread love, because by burning everything, we are only hurting our Mother Earth. We are only hurting our new generations. So we start by our families, by healing our families, our communities, our state, our cities, and we can even heal the world, but we got to heal ourselves first. Just wanted to share that. Thank you.
So I get that. I get that we have to operate from love, but I believe in Malcolm X, and I believe in Martin Luther King, and a lot of that generation was murdered. And if we don't stand for something that could potentially mean we have to put ourselves in place, in line, in front of a freaking tank, that's what it's going to take. It can't just be love. It's got to be more than that. And that's just my belief. I just, nothing good has ever come from struggle, right? Like, you have to have a struggle or some kind of something to push it past the tipping point. So don't get me wrong. I mean, I love everybody. You can see my logo is love. It's a heart. I'm totally down with love. But I think there needs to be more than just love, especially when a certain percentage of America is being taught to hate. And I'm not saying that I'm responding with hate. I'm saying when I'm using the word hate, it is in contrast to this concept of expecting me to teach you, right? Expecting me to tell you my history when it's all of our history, and you should be researching the history yourself, right? So when I use the word hate, I'm using it very generally, and I'm speaking towards groups that aren't even interested in me. They're not even interested in my history or the struggle or the things that I have gone through. That's where I have to draw the line. And yeah, that's it. That's it.
Yes, definitely. I do understand you, Carol, and I hear you and I feel your pain. I mean, I'm Mexican and getting raised in this nation, it wasn't easy at all. I've been put on bully. I've been experienced what racism is. I totally agree with you. And I think that Afro-Americans had it probably even worse, because at a certain time of life, I have no clue why we got divided. But I don't know, maybe because I speak in a language of love. I feel like even the people that have complied with that part of dividing us, it's not even their fault either. They were only following the way their parents raised them, their grandparents, their ancestors. So that's all they know. They know division. They know how to look at people not as the same. And I mean, I feel your pain, but I also highly believed that we cannot make like Chad was saying here, that also standing in front of the tank is also a form of love. If we have actions of love without hurting whatever we have in this world, that is acceptable. But when we are out there doing manifestations of burn it all and burning this and burning this door, that is just spreading hate and unconsciousness. I mean, it is going to be a time where we all are going to have to understand, because a lot of structures are falling off. We just have to give it time. And in that time, take it as a very valuable time to heal and to accept and forgive.
If I may interject right now, Myra, I wish you could have been here for the whole conversation, because I think you could have been really added a lot of value to the conversation. And I hope that Carol will accept our invitation to come back and maybe continue this conversation at another time. And I just want to honor that we do have another guest that's coming up. And again, thank you so much. This is not an easy conversation, but again, I really honor your unapologetic openness, Carol, and thank you, Myra, for coming in and catching at least the tail end of it. And hopefully we'll initiate another conversation like this. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, everyone. All righty, and it's we're going to transition now to the next segment. It's 11:41. I need to go to the bathroom, and I imagine I'm not alone in that pursuit. Shall we take like 5 minutes-ish? And then when we come back, here, I'm going to stop recording right now.